Hey everyone, my name's Angelica, and the activity that I have chosen to analyze for biomechanics is jumping jacks. I'm going to explain how they're done, the internal and external forces involved, some qualitative and quantitative elements of this activity. I'm going to be relating Newton's laws to jumping jacks as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about fluid dynamics. Then I'll break the jumping jacks down into 3 phases. I'll also talk about the major bones, muscles, muscle movements, and the planes and axes the movements are performed in. Okay, so jumping jacks are a type of physical exercise performed in an upright standing position by jumping to a position with the legs spread wide and in contact with the ground, and the hands touching overhead, and then returning to a standing position with the feet together and the upper extremities back to the sides of the body. So getting into internal and external forces, muscles and tendons are the structures producing forces that cause changes to our kinematic state. Activity of muscles produce internal forces which cause the proper movements needed from the extremities to perform this activity. The only external force that is used in this activity is gravitational force, and it's always going to be pulling straight downward. Gravitational force is equal to the mass of the person times the acceleration due to gravity, which is always going to be a constant 9.81 meters per second squared. The muscles do have to put work into creating the proper concentric and eccentric motions for each specific muscle in each phase. This involves certain quantities of neural stimulation. So like the more stimulus that the muscles can get, the faster and the more longer you're going to be able to actually do the activity. All movements in the jumping jack is angular motion. The major axes of rotation are anterior, posterior axes, and it's going to pass through your shoulders and your hips. Angular velocity is the rate of change of angular position of a rotating object. So if I wanted to calculate like my arm from my side above my head, I would just subtract the finished position from the initial position, and I would divide that by the time that it took to get from the side to the top. There's also moment of inertia, which is also the angular form of inertia. This is the resistance to changes in the state of angular motion. The equation for that is I equals mr squared. M is for mass and r is for radius, and you would just square the radius. Torque is the turning effect produced by a force. This would be like your humerus or the femur moving on the joint due to forces created by the muscle contracting. This is caused by an eccentric force meaning it is a force that doesn't go through the center of gravity, which is like your chest basically. So these forces aren't obviously going through your chest. So on to Newton's laws that are related to jumping jacks. So the first one I have is a rotating body will continue to turn about its axis of rotation with constant angular momentum unless an external couple or eccentric force is exerted upon it. So in a jumping jack, the internal eccentric forces created by the muscles are going to change the direction of the extremity movement throughout the exercise. The second law is the rate of change of angular momentum of a body is proportional to the torque causing it and the change that takes place in the direction in which the torque acts. So that is also known as like the law of acceleration. More frequent stimulation of the muscle will allow for more force, therefore causing acceleration to occur at the individual's will. You can accelerate and decelerate all you want with the movement. It's up to you. The third law is for every torque that is exerted on a body on another, there is an equal and opposite torque exerted from the second body onto the first body. So this is shown with like the abduction phase and the adduction phase of jumping jacks. They're equal yet opposite, so you don't overexert. There's not too much going on because they're going to be equal and opposite. the force that the body is pushing into the ground is also being pushed back up from the ground, but we don't notice it because the mass of the earth is so large, we can't feel the force that's being pushed back up onto us from it. So jumping jacks can be performed in aquatic exercises, but they're typically performed on land, making the fluid medium typically air. They can be done in water, which will have more significant impact from dynamic fluid components to the biomechanics of the activity relative to the components in an air medium. Different components of fluid dynamics include lift force and drag force. And then drag force also has two other components to it, which are known as surface drag and form drag. Air moves faster. Air is a faster moving fluid than water, therefore it exerts less pressure laterally on the body. So it makes it easier to be able to do on land. But there are benefits to performing jumping jacks in water because there's a lesser impact of force on the knee and ankle joints. So, it's better for like older people doing aquatics. It's not gonna like put as much force onto their joints. So there are 3 phases to performing a jumping jack. There's the ready phase, the abduction phase, and the adduction phase. I'll get up and show you those when I'm done talking about them and the muscle movements used and the muscles used. Let's see. Alright, so the major bones involved in the upper extremity movements are the scapula and the humerus. And then in the lower extremity movements, it's going to be your pelvis and your femur. This movement is generally known to be just performed in the frontal plane, which is also going to be in the AP axis. In this movement, there are at least 12 joint actions made and at least like 30 muscles used, so it's definitely a full body muscle stimulation. So in the ready phase, we're going to start in anatomical position to a ready position. The person brings the feet together, which is adduction of the legs. There's pronation of the wrist and adduction of the shoulders, so the palms are touching the trunk ipsilaterally. This is also going to be known as the fundamental position. The wrist pronation occurs in the transverse plane, longitudinal axes, and the muscles used for it are the pronator quadratus, the pronator teres, and the brachioradialis. The shoulder adduction occurs in the frontal plane, AP axes. The muscles used are pectoralis major, teres minor, latissimus dorsi, subscapularis, and infrascapularis. So going from the ready phase to the abduction phase, you're going to start in the ready position and it's going to end in an extended position. So all of your extremities are going to be abducted. Joint actions are going to include abduction of the shoulder. This occurs in the frontal plane, AP axis. Muscles include the medial deltoid, your supraspinatus. There's going to be supination of the wrists, which is going to occur in the transverse plane along the longitudinal axes. This is going to be your supinator muscle. Then there's abduction of the hip, which occurs in the frontal plane, AP axis. Your glutes are going to be performing this movement. There's also going to be plantar flexion of the ankle, which is in the sagittal plane, transverse axes. Muscles include your gastrocnemius, your soleus, your plantaris, your peroneus longus, and peroneus brevis. And you're also going to have dorsal flexion of the ankle, which is also in the sagittal plane, transverse axes. Muscles include the tibialis anterior, peroneus tertius, extensor digitorum longus, and your extensor hallucis longus. And that's because when you jump, think of this as your foot, it's going to go up, which is plantar flexion, and then come back down, which is going to be your dorsiflexion. And it's going to do the same thing in the next phase, which I'm going to start talking about now. So your adduction phase, it's going to start in that extended position, and it ends back in the ready position. The joint actions include adduction of the shoulder, which is in the frontal plane, AP axes. The muscles Involved in this are the pectoralis major, teres minor, latissimus dorsi, subscapularis infraspinatus. There's going to be pronation of the wrist, which is in the transverse plane, the longitudinal axes. The muscles in this are going to be your pronator teres, pronator quadratus, and brachioradialis. There's going to be adduction of the hip, which is in your frontal plane, AP axis. Muscles include your adductor brevis, adductor longus, and adductor magnus. Then you're going to have the plantar flexion and dorsiflexion of the ankle, just like in the AB abduction phase. It's going to use the exact same muscles that were used in that phase as well. So throughout this exercise, your elbows are also going to be slightly flexed the entire time. This is going to take place in the sagittal plane, transverse axes. The muscles include the brachialis, the biceps brachii, and the brachioradialis. Since you're standing, your knees are also going to be extended, which is in the sagittal plane. The muscles include, your quadriceps, so your rectus femoris, your vastus medialis, intermedius, and lateralis. When landing, slight flexion at the knees and ankles is encouraged to reduce the amount of stress placed on those joints. Definitely want to do that. The muscles of the abdomen should be stimulated during each phase, so you always want to keep your abs contracted. The trunk of the body, so basically like your head, all of your axial skeleton should remain stationary while the extremities are in motion. And the center of gravity, by maintaining even and balanced center of gravity when landing back into the ready position with the feet together, you will improve your stability, decrease risk of injury, and have support to perform the action. So I'll go ahead and show you what jumping jacks should look like. So here is from anatomical position into the ready position. So from ready position, we go into the abduction phase and the adduction phase. And you're going to when you keep doing this, and that's all that I have for jumping jacks. All right, thanks for listening.